All right, now to Georgia, where President-elect Joe Biden and President Donald Trump are campaigning ahead of tomorrow's Senate runoff. President Trump is hosting a rally in North Georgia for his party's candidates at 9 o'clock tonight, about 2 hours. And President-elect Joe Biden campaigning in Atlanta earlier today for the Democratic challengers. Now, the president's rally comes as House Democrats are calling on the FBI to open a criminal investigation into President Trump's phone call with Georgia's Secretary of State for possible violations of federal and state election laws. Now, the president heard on a lengthy phone call, I'm sure some of you have heard it by now, it's more than an hour long, claiming falsely that he won the election and telling Georgia's Secretary of State to, quote, find 11,780 votes. Joe Biden won the state by 11,779 votes. Well, a Virginia congressman is one of the people calling for the president to be investigated. Representative Don Beyer, he crafted a lengthy tweet today. I spoke with him a little earlier. He's calling for an investigation that looks into the president's recent phone call, but that's not all.
Legislators have been invited to the White House specifically for this purpose, and to look too at what role did Chief of Staff Mark Meadows play in this. Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, had made the same kind of phone call to Raffensperger, the Secretary of State in Georgia. It may not just be Donald Trump, but the people around him who've been trying to literally commit election fraud.
All right, well, he says what the president did in that one phone call is certainly an impeachable offense, but with just 16 days left in office, he says it is not worth pursuing in Congress. Now, I want to bring in our legal expert, Kim Wehle. She's a constitutional lawyer and University of Baltimore law professor. Always great to see you. Thank you for being here with us, Kim. Let's get right to it. I want to take the politics out of this. From a legal standpoint, do you believe the conversation calls for a criminal investigation, or do Democrats need to move on in this case?
There certainly are signs of potential criminal activity here because, as you mentioned, at both the state and federal level, it's a crime to solicit election fraud. So what is election fraud? We've heard a lot from the Republicans about voter fraud. That's impersonating a legitimate voter. Election fraud is coming up with fraudulent votes or distorting the count. And given that Georgia 3 times certified its election results, including counting the ballots by hand, and Joe Biden still won by about 12,000 votes, for President Trump to say, can you find me some votes, certainly raises the question if he was asking the Secretary of State to manufacture fraudulently a way for him to win Georgia.
Yeah, and Kim, with this one phone call, is that enough evidence for lawyers?
Well, the tricky part here is the question of intent. And, some people have weighed in, experts have weighed in saying there is enough. Some have said there is not. I think President Trump's response could be, listen, I believe in my heart that I won this election. He mentioned 400,000 votes that he won Georgia by. The problem is there just isn't any evidence of that. With 60 plus lawsuits where courts have thrown out cases or the cases were withdrawn because courts require evidence. So just because someone's willing to claim out of thin air, that isn't necessarily a legitimately held belief, but it's always difficult to prove someone's subjective intent, to crawl inside their head and say, this is what they thought. He really intended to basically thwart this election. That's hard to prove.
Yeah, listening to that phone call, the president seems convinced that he did, in fact, win this election. You hear some Republicans saying they take no issue with the phone call and the president was simply expressing frustration. Is that a plausible argument?
I think the fact that later on in the phone call, he also sort of dangled to Mr. Raffensperger's lawyer this notion that, well, if you don't do what I'm asking you to do, there could be criminal implications because we all know there's fraud in Georgia. That's also tricky. That doesn't help Mr. Trump's case in theory if this were to ever go to trial, which I don't think it would for a lot of political reasons. Because remember, Donald Trump in this moment is in charge of the entire federal criminal law enforcement investigative apparatus. He has power that no one else on the planet has. So for him to say, listen, look into this or else, that's tricky. That's difficult to say that that was just benign.
Yeah, I'm interested to see where this goes. Kim Wehle, always great chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Happy New Year to you too as well.